news
right.
is that now the Air Force One was in Omaha, Nebraska when she filed this one. The President was meeting with members of the Strategic Air Command, we understand. Here's Ann Compton's report.
This is a pool call from Air Force One. We have just landed. The President just landed at Offutt Air Force Base, home of the Strategic Command. We are in Nebraska. It is impossible to keep a plane as big as Air Force One secret. We actually watched ourselves land on the local TV news, which has live cameras here. Ari Fleischer has told us that President Bush is going to participate in a National Security Council meeting this afternoon by teleconference. He told us Vice President Cheney is working out of the Operations Center at the White House, which is an area somewhat protected compared to the rest of the West Wing. The President has spoken to Mrs. Bush, who is in a, quote, secure facility. We do not know how long we will be here, but we do know that the President is going to continue to deal with this. He has just gotten off the phone with Pataki and Giuliani, which you may know having seen their news conference. The President said, we are told, he looks forward to returning to Washington, but he understands that caution must be taken at times like this, and he must take those precautions to stay out of Washington, at least at the moment. Again, Air Force One has just landed off at Air Force Base in Nebraska, and as soon as we know more, we will call you back.
Radio as soon as you can.
That's
Ann
Ann
Compton of
with
ABC News.
Yeah.
Now, you know, the President's wife, Mrs. Bush, is still at a secure location.
She was supposed to speak this morning to Congress about early childhood development. Senator Kennedy of Massachusetts chairs the committee to which she was going to speak. And actually, they made a joint appearance earlier today to say, hey, understandably, she won't be talking.
Well, as of this point, she's in a secure location. Also, the daughters, Barbara at Yale and Jenna at the University of Texas, were also taken away to secure location. We have Governor Paris Glendening of Maryland with us by phone. Now, Governor, I understand you've declared a state of emergency for Maryland as well. Is that right?
Yes, I have. We're obviously very concerned about security after consulting with federal officials and talking directly with governors of the impacted states. We did a direct declaration of emergency. We have closed all the state facilities. We did receive some information. We don't know the credibility of it, but it was a list that was distributed supposedly prior to the attack that had 2 Maryland facilities on the list. Based on that, we took extraordinary action of securing those facilities, being the state capitol as well as the trade building in Baltimore. We are working with the federal officials on that. We're also trying to offer what assistance we can to our neighboring states. For example, I talked with Mayor Williams, talked with Governor Gilmore. We have mobilized the command staff of our National Guard, and the MP division of our National Guard has been federalized to provide assistance in the District of Columbia and in Northern Virginia. At this stage, quite candidly, our biggest challenge is rumor control, as you can imagine, but we are, I think, sorting out most of the major transportation problems, and at this stage we're offering just assistance to the surrounding states, offering support clearly to the President and his commitment that people will be brought to justice on this, and trying to do what we can to make sure that the Maryland facilities remain secure.
Governor Glendening, one of the reports that we're getting is the plane that went down in Pennsylvania reportedly was targeting Camp David.
The intelligence reports that we had indicated that that was a possibility, but that has not been confirmed to us.
Governor Glendening, you grew up, as I did, hearing about Pearl Harbor and the tragic attack there. What are your thoughts about these events today?
I think this is every bit as unbelievable, if not even more so, than the events of Pearl Harbor and other attacks. It is so stunning as almost to defy comprehension. I don't think it's going to sink in for many of us for quite some time, and certainly the magnitude of the loss of death and injury is almost unbelievable. Will certainly be greater than anything that we have seen. I think at this stage what we must do is try as a nation to remain reasonably calm, but also make it very clear that we support the president in whatever must be done to bring these people that have committed such a horror, to bring them to justice.
Easier said than done, though, Governor.
I clearly understand that, and I mean, we're, as you know, facing challenges just trying to track down the numerous rumors and things that are going on with threats to facilities all across the state now, and the copycat threats, or are they real? But it is just a sense of horror that everyone shares. And at this stage, I think what we've got to do is work in sympathy and support for the families and try to regroup as a nation.
That state of emergency that's been declared for Maryland, what will that allow you to do in your state to do?
We have already done several things. It permitted us, of course, obviously, to close the schools and to close all of the state facilities. But I've also delegated operational responsibility signed off by me to transfer whatever resources we need, National Guard, medevac, or medical supplies to impacted areas, particularly New York, but in any place that might be needed in the United States as a result of this.
You said you've talked to Governor Pataki?
I did. I talked to Governor Pataki.
What did he say to you? What, I mean, the situation there, obviously for us it's bad enough, but there is just horrendous.
Well, when I talked to him, which was about an hour after the collapse of the building, quite honestly, I think he was still trying to comprehend the full horror of it. He did indicate that they would be in need of major additional equipment, and I put our National Guard and our medical people in touch with his. I knew that he had a million things to do, and so at the time I obviously offered support, told him that we would ship out whatever he needed immediately, and that I had our sympathy, and for him to, through his people, let us know what else we can provide to help him.
Was he giving you a sense of how many deaths there were? I think I'd heard in the thousands.
He had at the time no idea at all, except obviously his personal knowledge of the World Trade Center, as most of us who have been there know that at any given time you have thousands and thousands of people in that
actually 50,000 people work in the building.
Governor, we can attach at least one name to some of these casualties. The Associated Press is reporting now that Barbara Olson, the wife of the Solicitor General of the United States, Ted Olson, who argues cases before the Supreme Court, was on board the American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. She had made a call from her cell phone, apparently. Barbara Olson is a personality and a former federal prosecutor and a personality in her own right here in Washington, D.C. And apparently she was on board that plane.
It's a tragedy, obviously, for the Olson family as well. But I will tell you what that symbolizes. I think during the course of the next several days, all across this country, between the passengers on the various planes and the people in the Pentagon and the people in the World Trade Center, these tragedies are going to unfold family by family and name by name, and the grief is going to be overwhelming. It's almost difficult to understand. I mean, that it's not even just devastation in one community, but between the nature of the Pentagon, the nature of the World Trade Center, and the fact that you had 4 major flights, this grief will be personally impacting families all across America.
And Governor Glendening, I think after the bombings at the World Trade Center in 1993, after Oklahoma City, and now this, is there a loss of innocence for us? Is there a sense now that we are no longer safe on our own soil?
Well, I think for many of us, we've felt that for quite some time, but the true scale of it has now been brought home, and just the horror of this type of coordinated attack, and about the number of people who obviously will have died and are seriously injured, we'll feel it family by family. But as a nation, I don't believe we'll ever be the same. We'll have to change many things in terms of our lifestyle, and we'll always be aware that terrorists can strike.
But don't people in your position have to be careful? The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize, to paralyze. You have to be careful that you don't play into their hands by shutting down our civil liberties and so forth?
Oh, absolutely. Our biggest challenge, and this is part of the reason I was saying that for Maryland, our biggest challenge is to remain calm. We're going to have to make sure that we stay a nation of law, to try to bring those to justice who have done this, but to make sure that they don't succeed in changing the nature of freedom in our society. Right. If they do that, even if we brought them to justice in a physical sense, they would have succeeded in part of their goals. So, on the one hand, I think we have every right to be angry, to demand justice, to demand that these people be brought to justice, and at the same time, though, to recognize that we must remain calm and commit to our basic values.
Right.
Governor Glendening, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you, Governor.
this afternoon.
Thank you.
Governor Paris Glendening of Maryland.
New York is dealing with what has, what kind of day, how would you describe it, Gordon? As I turned on the television this morning.
Somebody described it as a nuclear winter down there now in that district with the darkness and the smoke and the debris.
You know, sometimes we talk about a war zone. You hear us talk about war zones. I think that could realistically describe what's going on in New York right now.
For your information, I was on my way to New York when we heard about the Pentagon.
The Pentagon happened.
Yeah.
I saw you
hustle out of the building. What a stunning development. Well, let's go to Gretchen Carlson in New York.
Both 110-story towers of New York's World Trade Center collapsed after unknown terrorists attacked the buildings this morning. 2 aircraft, about 18 minutes apart, flew directly into the towers just as workers were arriving around 9 a.m. The second attack was captured on videotape, showing a large plane smashing into one of the 110-story skyscrapers. The building burst into flames, dropping debris all over the narrow streets of Lower Manhattan. Many are dead. Thousands are believed to be critically wounded. 50,000 people work in the World Trade Center.
I looked up and I saw the second plane hit. Had to be a commercial-sized airliner.
What went through your mind?
That it couldn't be real.
A short time later, when top portions of one of the towers collapsed, people on the ground were sent running for their lives.
Let's get out of here.
Officials stopped all flights across the nation. Both planes are believed to have been hijacked. All bridges and tunnels in New York have been closed, while security forces across the nation have been put on the highest alert.
CBS News quotes FBI sources as saying a total of 4 planes were hijacked, then intentionally crashed this morning. The latest one just 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. Gretchen Carlson, CBS News, New York.
You know, Gordon, so many individual stories as you see the frantic scene, the camera crews trying to get video.
You can see the people running as the big buildings begin to crumble.
One of the stories, a janitor, an elevator door open, a man was standing inside in flames. The janitor said he and a second fellow grabbed the man, put out the fire, dragged him outside. They said then they heard a second explosion and just saw people running and jumping from the 110-story high buildings.
Now, I understand we have eyewitness testimony from somebody who was in the earlier World Trade Center bombing. Is that right?
Back in '93. Let's go to that.
What did you do?
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. Do you want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
Wow.
All right, thanks very much.
Somebody else described it as almost like a stream of refugees.
Well, if you just joined us, that woman was in the World Trade Center for the previous bombing in 1993. Now, we're going to get a briefing from the Pentagon rather soon. Let's go to Dave Statter, who's been standing by there almost immediately after the collision. Dave?
Yeah, we have a 2-minute warning now on that briefing here, and we'll go to that as soon as it happens. Right now, you're looking at the scar, the gaping hole on the west side of the Pentagon, right near the helipad at Washington Boulevard. So this was much like the World Trade Center on a smaller scale. That area collapsed, I'm guessing, 45 minutes after the plane crash. It did not collapse immediately. The fire was burning over on the side, and it continues to burn now, mostly from what we can tell underneath the roof. Firefighters have been called in here from as far away as Montgomery County, and we just saw a ladder truck from Sterling in Loudoun County. As you've heard, 30 people confirmed injured at Arlington Hospital. We do not know the number of dead. We're hoping to get some more information on that in this Pentagon briefing, but we can't confirm for you at this moment that they're going to tell us that. We do know there are dead people. Obviously, who were working inside the Pentagon, also the people who were on that plane that crashed into the Pentagon this morning about an hour after the World Trade Center attacks. The firefighters have been working, trying to put out this stubborn blaze. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of stories of heroism. We even heard that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was out helping people for 15 minutes after the blast, trying to help those who were injured before he went into the command center there to take control of this operation. Many of the Pentagon personnel have been scattered about. We've been putting the number up for Navy and Marine personnel to call so they can get an accounting of any Pentagon employees who work for the Navy or Marines, to call them at 1-877-663-6772, 877-663-6772. And again, that's only for Navy and Marine personnel to check in if you work at the Pentagon so they know where you are, because that's got to be a big problem. This has been described as the world's largest office building when it was built, and with all the people that work here trying to keep an accounting of them. They were scattered about. A lot of people were standing immediately outside the building after the plane crash occurred, and then the FBI agents on the scene and police started shooing people away because there was concern that another plane might be headed for the Pentagon. And of course that was a real threat considering what happened at the World Trade Center. Thankfully, that did not happen. But the fire and rescue personnel have had a tough time here. They're going to be assisted by the Fairfax County Urban Search and Rescue Team. These are the people we have followed their assignments all over the world for earthquakes. Here, their assignment very close to home at the Pentagon. Unfortunately, from talking to fire and rescue personnel familiar with this, they pretty much agree with what we have to say about this, is that it'll probably be a recovery operation because of the large amount of fire and smoke. Anybody trapped in there who was alive, unfortunately, that fire and smoke is likely to kill them. So that's basically the situation. We're waiting for a Pentagon briefing, hopefully a little bit more solid information here this afternoon on what happened other than a plane crash at the Pentagon, some details on casualties and what is going to happen with operations at the Pentagon. Still trying to get the fire under control, smoke pouring out, and that's the main effort going on right now. The ambulances that are on the scene have been on the scene for the last couple hours and have not transported anybody out of here.
Dave, by the way, there are 24,000 employees at the Pentagon on any given day if they're all there. The Navy has sent aircraft carriers, Dave, and guided missile destroyers from Norfolk to New York and Washington, including the Kennedy and the USS George Washington.
Yeah, we asked them specifically about that here at the last briefing. They couldn't provide us a lot of detail. We first heard about that while talking to CNN Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre live earlier. He was able to give us that information, but they have not been in their briefings here. And this is the unusual scene. I mean, here we are sitting in a gas station parking lot for briefings from the Pentagon command.
They've also sent a hospital ship, the Comfort, which is based in Baltimore Harbor. That's being made available. I don't know if they've sent it. It's being made available. They're deploying amphibious ships, guided missile cruisers, guided missile destroyers, capable of responding, of course, from threats from the air and the sea. And, of course, the amphibious ships carrying Marines as well as sailors.
And our borders are being protected, too, Gordon. The tunnel between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, closed to car traffic. Security's been tightened at all U.S.-Canada border crossings. Also, ports of entry along the U.S.-Mexican border are open, but the officials there remain on high alert. We're told here security for Great Lakes shipping have been tightened. Coast Guard inspecting ships at St. Mary's River, which has links to Lake Huron and Superior as well.
You have to remember also that there's still operations going on in the Pentagon, the National Military Command Center, where at one point we know that Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld was, is an operation. It's not affected by the fire, but they say that the command center is quite smoky, but it is operating, and a lot of those decisions, I'm sure, are being made there.
Are you still seeing F-15 fighters overhead, Dave?
I haven't seen one in a while. We did see them earlier today. The only other aircraft up have been police helicopters that have been here, and there were a couple early on that did some medical transport, some medevacs of the first people we saw injured, 2 men who seemed to be possibly critically burned. They had burns over a good portion of their body.
Dave, when the briefing starts, give us a quick heads up.
Yes, we'll come right back.
He was just talking about the injured, and Jennifer Ryan's been standing by at Virginia Hospital Center to bring us up to date on the condition of the people there, how many people are there. Jennifer, what's the latest?
We have 30 people here. 13 have been admitted to the hospital. There have been 6 that were discharged. Of the 13, we have 8 people in intensive care. 4 of those people bad enough off to need ventilators this evening. Now, we want to let you know that some of their injuries really are significant smoke inhalation. That's what they're seeing a lot here. But also they are dealing with broken bones, cuts, bruises, burns to the face and hands and that nature. You'll see the picture behind me is quite different right now. We only have a couple of police officers. All the hospital personnel has gone inside within the last couple of minutes. Yes.
Jennifer, let me interrupt you. We're going to go to that Pentagon briefing right now, okay?
You bet.
Jennifer Ryan, thanks. This is Karen Hughes, the communications director of the White House.
And rescue and emergency management operations to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
You've been listening to Karen Hughes, the White House Communications Director, as she spoke with reporters and the American people. There was also a briefing going on at the Pentagon, because the Pentagon was one of the areas hit. Let's take it there.
The impact was on the outer ring, which is the E ring. It appears though the plane went in up to the E, D, and to the C ring. Not all the way through the C ring, but
halfway through the C. Halfway through the C.
Again, I haven't been in that area, but it looks like at least 3 rings it went into.
Which wedge is that?
It's actually splitting the wedges. Part of it is in wedge 1, and part is in wedge 2.
I've noticed that you.
It's in the area of Carter 4.
I noticed that you brought in some heavy equipment. Can you tell me what you're going to be doing with that?
The heavy equipment will be used in a search and rescue, because obviously we have collapsed building there, so they would be assisting the fire department in picking up objects.
Do you have any idea how many people are accounted for at this point?
Not at this moment, no, we do not.
Have you accounted for the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff?
I have not, personally.
Corey? Excuse me, is the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff accounted for?
Can't tell you about the entire Joint Staff.
The Joint Chiefs?
Joint Chiefs, cannot tell you that, no.
Who is not accounted for?
We're still going through all the lists. But one thing
We're asking the heads of the military services, the chairman and the vice.
Right, the military, the service secretaries have been accounted for, the chairman has, and the vice has. The vice has been in the building with the secretary. The chairman was out of town on his way back. The vice chairman has been in the building with the secretary since this morning.
To be utterly clear, you cannot account for the heads of the military services at this time?
I will come back to you on that. We'll confirm it.
How many people would normally have been working at this time of day on a weekday in the building?
Well, it's a new area of the building. That's our problem. The part of the building. It's a new area of the building, so it's hard to say how many were there. We have to talk to the renovation office to find out what offices moved to that space since the renovation has opened that area for occupancy.
Sir, are there still people trapped inside?
There will probably be some people trapped.
Can you tell us have any bodies or any injured people been removed from there yet?
No, they have not.
No, they haven't.
Can you talk a little bit about the evacuation of the injured, the number of ambulances, air ambulances involved, kind of go into the scope of that?
I don't know the numbers. It's just a large number. I mean, again, we had support coming from everywhere. We had helicopters, we had ambulances, we had fire departments from everywhere helping us out. It's a very large number.
This was more than the Pentagon Fire Department was obviously able to handle?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Hey, Tori, did you say the SecDef never left the building? SecDef never left the building. He was
in his office when he felt the concussion, went down the hallway to see what was going on, went outside the building. He actually came over to the west side and was actually there and helped get some people onto stretchers and into ambulances.
Can you account for General Shushan?
Again, I will come back to you very quickly. I'll ask Admiral Quigley to make a call. We'll come back to you and account for that before we leave. Absolutely not, but I will ask Admiral Quigley just to triple check and we come back. But the secretary was outside and helped get some of the injured onto the stretchers, into the ambulances. Then he came back in and has spent most of the time with the vice chairman in the NMCC.
What about U.S. military forces worldwide? Are they now on the highest state of alert?
The threat conditions are on the highest state.
Okay. Worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Worldwide? Excuse me, let's clarify. Have you gone worldwide to Delta?
No, the threat conditions are at their highest alert.
Everywhere?
Yes.
Around the world? All U.S. military bases around the world.
Do you need any help from the community?
The community is giving us tremendous support. I think as Chief Jester has pointed out, they have given us incredible support in terms of the search and rescue efforts.
We just finished out about ThreatCon Delta. We're initially under the impression that it's just local area that's a ThreatCon Delta, and other area commanders are determining what is the appropriate threat condition. Is that the case, or is it worldwide ThreatCon Delta?
Let me triple check it for you, and we'll come back and tell you.
Thank you. For those of us who aren't it's worldwide what?
We're going to triple check it, and I will let you know. Okay.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Chief Jester, could you just give us a sense of what services predominantly in that area that was hit?
Again, it was a new area, so we are asking the renovation office right now to tell us who moved into that area.
Marine Corps Aviation takes up a lot of it.
Were there construction people in this area?
There were construction people in Wedge 1, but Wedge 1 covers several corridors, so we don't know exactly where they were.
Sir, as we look at the damage from here, how pervasive is it heading this way and that? When we look, we see this area with some window and burned areas, but does it go much further down these halls and those?
Doesn't appear to be, no. There's smoke in the building. There's smoke all around inside the building. It varies from a light smoke to fairly heavy smoke.
Were you able to seal off sections of the buildings?
Yes, you can see there's no damages in areas, yes.
Can you say how many yards or feet of damage there are along the corridor or the width?
Well, I haven't been inside. I mean, I can only judge that for what you see from the outside.
Chief, what will be the standards for reopening the Pentagon tomorrow for business for the military?
That is being examined right now.
Chief Jester, you spoke of two areas. You said one had just begun to be occupied and had recently been renovated, and the other you said was behind the heliport and people were being moved out of that area?
They were offices that were being moved to the new Wedge 1. They were in preparation for construction in Wedge 2.
What force was getting hit? The plane impact?
I couldn't speculate right now.
Is there a sprinkler system in this building, and did it do any good?
In the new area is a sprinkler system.
Did it do any good?
Last question.
I would not really be able to tell you.
Last question over here.
Is there any hope or belief that there could be survivors inside?
In the area that's not damaged, there would be, yes. I would not want to speculate on that one.
Thank you. Hey, she said.
You've been watching live coverage of the briefing at the Pentagon, explaining what the situation is there after the plane crashed into the Pentagon. One of 4 planes hijacked earlier today, 3 of those crashing into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
And now it's believed the 4th may have been headed for Camp David. We continue our coverage now with Eyewitness News at 4 o'clock.
Don't worry.
And then we heard the crash. We ran through the window. Building and went into the Trade Center.
Trade Center, we saw a shrapnel fall, and we said, get out.
The left side of the World Trade Center out on the second building. That's all we saw, and everybody just panicked and ran.
A day of terror rocks the United States to its core. 4 commercial airliners are hijacked. 3 of them are used on attacks on U.S. targets. The terrorist attacks collapse New York's famous World Trade Center towers. And part of the Pentagon, President Bush vows the perpetrators will be brought to justice.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
And what a day it's been. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gravir Dinsa.
I'm Gordon Peterson. This is an Eyewitness News special report on the terrorist attacks today on America. The scenes of terror that unfolded today looks like something out of a movie. First, a plane hijacked by terrorists flies into one of the World Trade Center towers. A few minutes later, while that structure smokes and burns, a second plane is caught on tape flying straight into the second tower. And the building erupts as the plane crashes into a huge fireball. The damage caused by the crash causes one of the massive towers, Tower 2, to collapse, and a short time later, Tower 1 tumbles in a huge cloud of dust. Both towers were 110 stories tall, and the impact of the planes reduced them to rubble.
And while many of us were watching what was going on in New York, this is what happened in Washington. A second wave of the attack. Another plane crashes near the Pentagon, sparking several explosions and a fire there. Part of the Pentagon collapses. Military officials say there are extensive casualties and an unknown number of deaths. And a 4th hijacked plane crashes 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Virginia Representative Jim Moran said after a Marine Corps briefing today that plane was intended for Camp David, which of course is the presidential retreat in the Catoctin Mountains of Maryland.
4 hijacked airliners, 3 direct hits. The death toll of the most brazen terrorist attack ever on U.S. soil is expected to be very, very high.
One of the direct hits was right here in the Washington area, as we just said, and it was at the Pentagon. Our Dave Statter is there for us. We have live team coverage of all of our day's events. Let's begin with Dave at the Pentagon. Dave?
Well, Gavir and Gordon, we had just heard the end of a briefing here by Tory Clark, spokesperson for the Pentagon, Chief John Jester, spokesperson or chief of the Defense Protective Service. And basically, they can't tell us how many people are dead here. They know they have casualties here. We'll look at the building where firefighting operations continue here many hours after this plane crashed into the Pentagon this morning. Let's go back to some videotape from earlier today when the fire first started and the plane crash occurred. This is what it looked like just minutes after the plane crash this morning. And rescue operations began. We saw a couple burned men pulled away, then medevaced. We heard from Tory Clark about an Army captain who jumped in to help out the injured people, pulling people away, those who were burned. He himself was burned, had his hands burned, was sent to the hospital, says he's back at the scene trying to help out. One of the heroes of today. A lot more, I'm sure, and a lot more people we don't know about who have lost their lives here, both on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon and in that building. We just don't have an accounting yet. They cannot provide it here. Let's go to the other tape that we have is of the collapse of the Pentagon. I believe we have that tape of when, during this firefighting operation, I'm guessing 45 minutes into it, suddenly the center area where the plane crash occurred and the most fire was, it collapsed. We don't know if anybody else was injured during that collapse, but this was much like a smaller version of what happened at the World Trade Center. The firefighting operation continues, and after that is over with, the urban search and rescue team from Fairfax County, we are told, will be able to go into the building and start searching for people. They're not very optimistic from the people I've talked to in the fire service because of the great amount of fire that anybody trapped will have had to deal with that heavy smoke. And if you remember, we've told you many times that smoke is what kills people in the fire, and there's a great deal of smoke here. Smoke often kills before the fire ever gets to you. The problem in this building is that it's an old building that has a lot of nooks and crannies. The fire gets trapped in it. There have been fires before in the Pentagon, and they've had to deal with the same situation, fire traveling from one end of the building to the other. That initial jet fuel burned off. The fire went into the bowels of the building and is now still being attacked by Arlington firefighters who have been assisted by firefighting agencies from all over the region as far away as Montgomery County and Loudoun County. Now, one thing we heard from the Pentagon spokesperson is they can't at the moment account for all the heads of the military. They are still trying to do that, and they can't account for all the military personnel who are in the Pentagon. They're still trying to figure out who is okay. They have asked that we put out this number. It's 877-663-6772. It's the muster line for Navy and Marine personnel who work at the Pentagon. If you work there and they have not accounted for you, please call in. Let them know you're okay. Let them know where you are. We're expecting further briefings through the day. I know everybody wants to know how many people died here. We just don't have an answer for you.
Rumsfeld was inside at the time of the impact. Is that right, Dave?
He was inside, heard the explosion, came outside to actually help, we are told, for 15 minutes. One of those who helped were the initial people who were injured.
And there's still strategic planning going on inside now.
Right. The National Military Command Center is in the Pentagon. It's smoky, they say in there, but that's where Secretary Rumsfeld has been since he went back inside the building and calling all the shots, helping to call all the shots for the military, as we've heard the activation of aircraft carriers and the like into seaports.
Dave Statter.
And the military's gone to Delta, which is the highest state of alert, I guess.
Yes, they said it's the highest threat alert they're at the moment, which of course we assumed, but the Pentagon did confirm that a few moments ago.
Dave, a quote off the Associated Press: "Any notion of America being invincible died."
Our lives have all
rubble.
Yeah, our lives have all changed.
And Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska says, "America is forever changed. America is in for a long fight."
Look what happened today, Dave. For the first time in history, as I understand it, the FAA closed down every airport in America.
And that's something interesting. We were talking about alert of coming in here. Radar at National Airport had to show that jet coming in. How much warning did they know that they had somebody unauthorized in the airspace? It's constantly monitored, of course, because of potential threats for the White House. So how much advance warning did they know? And obviously they didn't know the intention, not that they could have stopped it.
And right now the enemies are simply they, because we don't know who they are.
Very much so.
Greyhound shut down bus service in the Northeast. Amtrak suspend train service in the Northeast Corridor. American section of St. Lawrence Seaway closed. Manhattan subway line shut down. Louisiana offshore oil port handling supertankers in the Gulf of Mexico suspended. Security of a Great Lakes shipping titan. Coast Guard inspecting ships in St. Mary's River, linking Lake Huron to Lake Superior, and on and on and on and on.
And
That's a first.
It is.
And the fire continues to burn out of control here at the Pentagon.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. There are, as Dave said, they believe there are many people still trapped inside. They don't know how many, and probably fatalities. But a lot of the injured from the Pentagon were taken over to Virginia Hospital Center.
Well, that's right. And Jennifer Ryan now is there with more. Jennifer?
Good evening to both of you. We are here at the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, where so many of the people from the Pentagon were brought because this is the closest location. It's about 5 miles away from the Pentagon, and all day we've been seeing people come in here, different modes of transportation, many ambulances, police cars, unmarked cars. People just packed victims into their van, and they brought them here because these were people who needed help. They battled the traffic. They eventually got them here. 30 people in all, we're told, 13 admitted to the hospital today. Of them, there are 8 people in intensive care, 4 of them on ventilators, very serious injuries. We spoke with the Assistant Director of Emergency Services, Dr. John Sverher, not too long ago. Here's what he had to say.
We've seen a variety of injuries. I guess a lot of those we've seen are typically associated with a blast-type injuries. We've seen a lot of smoke inhalation injuries, and those people have been some of the sickest folks here. We've also seen some fractures of the extremities, also burns to the face and hands. Those have been the primary injuries we've seen. None of our physicians are currently going out to the field. I should say that many of our physicians have offered to go out to the field, but the response we're getting from them right now is that it's not necessary.
They are caring for the 30 people who are here today, and we've already heard of a few discharges. Some people have been allowed to go back home, find their way home after all of this. We have some incredible video that we've been shooting all day of people arriving with various injuries. So many of the injuries, cuts and bruises and broken bones and that sort of thing. We were told that of the burn injuries, there are a few that are very serious, and there's thought that they might send them to other burn units in the area. Of course, there's a big problem with traffic, getting them there in a timely manner and whatnot, so they haven't made any permanent plans yet, but they are trying to come up with some strategic plan in case those people do need to be moved into higher level trauma centers. They are in need of blood in this city as well as New York. It is a huge cry for blood tonight because they're going to run short. This time of year is always difficult, so if you can and you want to help, you should donate blood. We've